When I look back on my almost 9 years of doing street photography, there's this one thing that keeps coming up. I learned a lot of lessons along the way, but the one lesson I've learned the hard way and the most from is not to overcommit. I like to share what overcommitment means for me in street photography and what key lessons I've learned that would make me do street photography differently if I was starting over in 2025. I recently wrote a blog post. If I had to start over with street photography, would I do anything differently? I think it's a natural process to think and reflect on the past. And while that blog post became more of a trip down memory lane on certain things I could have done differently, they inherently made me the street photographer I am today. So being able to understand my need, the way I do street photography, and the way I understand street photography. If you're new here, and I'm guessing you are because 80% of the viewers on my channel are new, so welcome, and if you're returning, welcome as well. My name is Ambreen, aka Hipster in Copenhagen. I've been a street photographer for over 8 years. I also have a website where you can check out my newsletter and blog and a complete overview of all the gear that I own. Alright, so let's get back to the video. Let's start with the first one, which is overcommitting to street photography in general. And I would say keep it light and fun, especially in the beginning. Sometimes we tend to treat something as a chore or something we have to do instead of something we would like to do. And that's why it's important to keep it light and fun, I believe, as long as possible, because street photography is very much about having the right attitude. So if you go out and you're in a bad mood, and that would reflect on your street photography, at least it did for me. So every time I was in a not so good mood, it also reflected the street photography I was doing, which means that I didn't come home with great photos, and I was also in a bad mood afterwards. So for me, it really works to be in a, I would not say in a happy state, but in a neutral state where I'm open to exploring, because street photography is all about noticing and exploring the small things and the quiet details. And that takes the right attitude, especially when you're out on the streets where things are moving so fast, because you are the only one able to see things the way you see through your lens and your own worldview. And the other thing is that there is risk of burnout, experiencing street photography fatigue, or just falling out of love with street photography. That would be a really bad thing, right? So for me, it's very important that I don't overcommit to street photography. That's why I say keep it light and fun, because as long as you treat it as something that you want to do, that you get value out of, it will keep you going, and no matter if it's raining or snowing, you will get out there. But if you start to treat it as a chore, something you have to do, you suck the energy and the joy out of it. So that's what I mean about not overcommitting to street photography in general. And the second thing is to start slow. So just remember, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. Hopefully you will do it for many, many years to come. And there's something about enjoying the journey instead of just thinking about reaching the destiny. This is something a very good colleague of mine told me years ago, because I was gunning for the next promotion and the next promotion. And she told me, also try to enjoy the journey, and eventually you will get to your destination, but you will also remember it as being as a good process along the way. So for street photography, it means that be able to understand the camera basics, understand exposure triangle, Sony 16, or whatever challenge you have set for yourself for your goals. And then once you're ready, move on to the next thing. Alright, so the next one is everything all at once, and this is something I say a lot, and what I mean here is that don't focus on multiple focus areas, so don't try to learn a lot of things at the same time. And this is one of the main lessons that I've learned over the years, is that I tried, especially in the beginning, to just learn everything as quickly as possible, no matter what. And I really overwhelmed myself. So I was learning about just basic camera theory, which actually I didn't learn because I was focused on other things as well. And it took me years to just learn about the exposure triangle. Then I was learning about editing, the post-processing, color theory, and then also just this YouTube channel trying to to the different video formats, how to record and lighting and so many things. And that's what I mean about everything all at once. So try to have one focus area at a time, and once you mastered that, move on. I think that's the best advice I can give you, especially if you're a newbie or if you're struggling with a certain thing. It also goes with technique. So if you're learning to master, let's say, long exposure, try to be patient with yourself and try to understand that things take time, and sometimes you have to allow yourself to process things and just come back to it. It doesn't mean that you are unable to figure it out or learn it. Sometimes for some people it just takes longer. So everything all at once, it's something I really enjoy saying, and I also say it to myself sometimes when I'm overwhelmed, I'm trying to learn something new. Overcommitting to a particular style, and having a particular style can be both great, but it also can be limiting in the long run as a street photographer. So we all like our labels and we all like our small boxes that we find, very comfortable being within, and just having our box of style, so to say, which is really great, especially if you're a newbie or you are in the beginning stages of your street photography journey. But I would say it can also limit you in the long run. It certainly did for me, because we become so comfortable that we stay within that box or having that particular label on us, and that we feel comfortable to go out the comfort zone and trying out new things. And an example I can share with you is that I really love high contrast light and shadow photography, silhouette photography. I've done it for years, and in my own opinion, I perfected it to a degree where I can just pick up my camera, go out, find a nice spot, and make a beautiful silhouette photograph. And for many years, I was really content with those really beautiful, pin-sharp photographs. But I also realized that I was not moving as a street photographer as much as I wanted. I was, in a sense, closed off and saying, this is one particular style I like, and this is the only thing I want to do. And to be honest, I got bored, and I felt like it became more of a mechanical process for me just to go out and do the same thing over and over. It might be a different backdrop, it might be a different subjects, a different kind of silhouette photography, but essentially, and it boils down to, it just was the same over and over again. And I think that was also one of the main reasons that I felt out of love with street photography, or I was not so happy that I used to be in my early years when I was learning street photography. So in 2023, I shook it up a little bit. I don't think I did it on purpose. I just bought a new camera, and that kickstarted a whole new journey for me as a street photographer, because I went back to the 35mm focal length, and I talked about it in some of my other vlog videos. You can check them out as well. But a long story short, I ended up loving wider focal lengths now, like the 28. I have the 28 on my Leica M6. So my point here is that I went from being super comfortable doing one particular style of street photography, which is great because in my own opinion, I started to perfect it. And then I had to restart, relearn, and get my joy back for street photography, trying to explore something new, which was a lot closer to my subjects, using very different focal lengths, like the 35 and 28. It also gave me a new sense of purpose being a street photographer. And that way, in my own opinion, I think I've progressed so much just within 1 year. So I started in the summer of 2023, and it's been a hell of a journey since then. That's what I mean when I say don't overcommit to a particular style. All right, so let's continue with breakdown number 3, which is don't overcommit to a particular brand or type of gear, because it can become a very costly affair to get out of that ecosystem of that particular brand that you invested in upfront. So let me give you an example of my early days. So back then I did a lot of research, and I ended up buying the Olympus Micro Four Thirds camera, and it was really not a good choice for me because of numerous issues, but one of them was that I kept dropping the camera because there was virtually no grip on it, and as a newbie I wanted a camera that was a bit more bulky, and back then we had those big bulky DSLR cameras. Owning that camera for 4, 5, 6 months, I ended up selling it. But what I also did in the meantime, investing very heavily in the entire ecosystem, that I ended up buying 4 or 5 lenses, so different focal lengths. I didn't have any experience with using those focal lengths or remotely understanding my need in terms of the type of photography I wanted to do and what that meant in terms of the different focal lengths. And they might be good focal lengths to own in your street kit, but the point here is that I didn't know how to use them. When I sold the camera, I also had to get rid of the entire ecosystem and costing me a lot of money. Since then, luckily, I learned my lesson, and after that camera, I actually downgraded to a much cheaper camera. I bought my beloved Canon 800D that I talk about all the time. I had that camera and I learned all my street photography on that camera for 3 years, and I only had one lens. I think on the third year I bought another lens, but they were so cheap, so it didn't matter. But I really learned my lesson not to invest heavily before I understood my need as a street photographer. So the morale of the story is don't overcommit, especially in the beginning. And if I continue with my story, so once I understood my need and I wanted to upgrade to a better camera, so I did some research and I wanted to buy a Sony camera, and which is the Sony A7C that I've had ever since. For me, investing in the Sony brand and the entire ecosystem, so basically owning multiple camera lenses and so forth, and it's a very well thought through decision on my part that I made all these years ago. And still to this day, I don't regret buying or investing in that brand because I have multiple uses for my camera and I understand my needs better. Those were some of the bigger lessons learned, especially on the money side of things. Committing to something is great, and also having that ability. And when it comes to street photography, it requires a special kind of commitment to be able to have that continued progress and be able to hone your skills year after year. But I would say there's a difference between committing and overcommitting. I believe that overcommitting can put focus on the wrong things and keep you away from that progress and just make things more difficult than they have to be. And some of the biggest lessons I've learned has been a product of overcommitting too fast. And I think I meant well, but it momentarily put me off track. But hey, there's always some learning to be had, right? All right, I'll see you in the next one.